A few months back, when Sheila McClear called up her pharmacy to refill her Adderall prescription, the people on the other end of the line were not exactly happy to hear from her.
They said, we don't have a single pill left to give anyone in the pharmacy.
This is how Sheila learned there's an Adderall shortage at the moment. And when I say shortage, I mean Sheila's got a friend who actually bought some Adderall on the street rather than calling up pharmacies one by one. Just for context, Adderall is a common drug. It's used to treat ADHD in kids and adults, nearly 20 million of them each year. Sheila is a writer. She lives in New York City. Without this drug, the basics of her life, stuff like hitting deadlines, it gets that much harder. Which is why she spent weeks looking for her supply. And in the meantime, tried to use other drugs to help her focus. She experimented with 5-hour energy drinks. She hates 5-hour energy drinks.
And finally, I just was like, I'm just going to have to drink a lot of coffee. And there's just nothing better, on the market than coffee right now.
How many pharmacies do you think you and your provider called altogether to try to track down the Adderall you have now?
Oh, she probably called, 10. I probably called 8.
Eventually, Sheila found a place that would refill her prescription. Now she keeps her remaining Adderall in a little glass vial next to her stove. She's been watching it dwindle day by day. And she's worried about what's going to happen when she starts calling pharmacies again.
People don't really take Adderall seriously always, but, try telling someone, you can't have your blood pressure medication for 8 days. There's a shortage on that, If you want to exist in the modern world, you have to be able to get this stuff done, and that's what Adderall does. Otherwise, you're just not functioning.
Do you think differently about going to the drugstore now?
Well, yeah, I used to depend on them, kind of blindly, but now it's like, it feels like a gamble. Next week I'm going to call about my Adderall, but it might be delayed, and I have no idea how long it'll be delayed. Already I'm sort of taking less. It's disconcerting and precarious now.
Today on the show, why pharmacies across the U.S. are struggling to fill one of the most common prescriptions in the country. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Saks.com. Saks.com editors are always tracking the top styles that are trending right now. Tailored blazers and midi dresses are selling out at Saks.com, especially from brands like Veronica Beard and The Row. And Saks.com editors are seeing Loewe's oversized tote on the streets of New York, Milan, and Paris. If you want your own free personalized trend recommendations, Saks.com stylists can do that and more. Plus, there's free shipping and returns all the time at Saks.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, when you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right now from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $698 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Ike Swetlitz has been tracking the Adderall shortage since it began last summer. He covers health for Bloomberg News. I called him up to explain how patients like Sheila got to the point where they are hoarding their psychiatric drugs. Ike told me the shortage is curious for a bunch of reasons, starting with how he got wind of it a few months back. He was working on a completely different story about ADHD, and the people he was interviewing kept mentioning how hard it was for them to get their meds.
And I thought, well, that sounds a little strange. Maybe it seems like there's something going on at the pharmacy.
Yeah.
So then I started calling other patients, contacting the pharmacies, looking online for what people were saying about it, and stumbled upon a post on Reddit that there were a number of people there who were writing about their difficulty filling Adderall prescriptions. And one of them said he had reached out to the FDA to see what was going on, and that the FDA had shared with that person that there were some delays with Teva, which is the pharmaceutical company that makes most of the Adderall. They make the branded generic Adderall in the United States.
It's interesting. You've put it like it's almost like this news came out by accident, but it doesn't seem like something that should be known by accident. Like, it seems like there should be a statement, people should know. It doesn't seem like something that should be unknowable, that there's a shortage of a pretty popular medication.
At that point, and this was over the summer, I think it was in July and August when I started doing the reporting. At that point, the FDA had not issued any sort of announcement. The FDA has said, that they don't want to alarm the public when they're, sort of early in the process, when they're working to try and prevent a shortage, right? Because then everyone's going to go and try to stock up on it and sort of make the situation worse.
Eventually, in October, the FDA did acknowledge what was going on, but there were still lingering questions about why pharmacies were coming up short. Teva, the company that manufactures Adderall, they have tried to explain the shortage a little bit. What have they said?
Yeah, so they said that there was a labor shortage on the packaging line that happened a little bit earlier, and there were a lot of sort of labor shortage issues, in the past few years amidst the COVID pandemic. It's still a little bit, unclear what the sort of specifics of the labor shortage were, but they've said they were on the packaging line and that they were resolved by the summer, but that sort of caused a backlog that, led to the shortage that we saw in the months after that.
Why did it last?
Well, they've said it just takes time to catch up. And while Teva's doing that, customers, the pharmacies, wholesalers that are, buying the medications from the manufacturers and then giving them to the patients at the pharmacies, would turn to other drug manufacturers to buy the Adderall. And, those drug manufacturers hadn't anticipated that increase in demand from those customers who had previously gotten it from Teva. So it sort of spiraled throughout the market.
As one manufacturer after another tried to make up for Teva's labor shortages, there was something else going on, a dramatic rise in the number of people looking for ADHD drugs. The Washington Post has estimated prescriptions for Adderall have soared 30% in the last 5 years. That's a problem because the government tightly controls how much Adderall can be manufactured in the first place. It's classified as a Schedule II controlled substance, in the same category as opioids like oxycodone. The Drug Enforcement Agency sets an industry-wide cap, a quota, on the raw amphetamine needed to manufacture Adderall. Without DEA approval, no one's allowed to make any more.
So the federal government will set the total quota, right, for the total amount of the raw ingredient that can be produced by sort of everyone combined. And then within that, each of the manufacturers, presumably Teva included, in this instance, would apply to the government and say, okay, we want to make this much, we want to make that much. The government would evaluate those applications and sort of divide up the total quota amongst all the manufacturers. Now, both the federal government and the manufacturers, they can request and make adjustments to those numbers throughout the year if they think that they really need more in order to meet the needs of people. So it's not, set in stone. Those adjustments could be made.
So when Teva realized that they didn't really have enough Adderall to go around, they were running low, did they go to the DEA and say, hey, we need to adjust our quotas here? Like, we're not going to be able to supply all the people who need this drug with what we have right now?
I've asked Teva that question, and they haven't answered it. There are, other companies. One other, large generic drug maker said that they did request more. Some of that request was granted, some of it was denied. But, that's a question that I haven't gotten an answer from Teva, and, also from the DEA. We've asked the DEA sort of for the company-specific information, which they haven't provided.
So what does the DEA say about this excuse that, like, well, our quotas weren't working this year, and so that's resulting in this shorter supply? Do they just say that's not so?
Well, so the DEA has given me some, numbers about this. They get reports from companies at the end of the year, right? So the quota is set at the beginning of the year. And then at the end of the year, the DEA gets information from the companies saying, how much of the ingredient do you still have, right? And what the DEA has told me is that there was a lot of the amphetamine raw material that the companies still had at the end of last year, at the end of 2022.
So they're saying use your leftovers.
Yeah, and it's complicated because it's a little unclear exactly who has these leftovers, right? So they're the companies that manufacture sort of the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the chemical that's in Adderall that makes it Adderall. And then they're the companies that actually manufacture the pills or the capsules that you swallow. So we don't know where exactly that ingredient is and, who has it. But the DEA is saying that there's a lot of the raw ingredient on the market somewhere, and therefore the shortage we're seeing is not a shortage caused by the quotas.
This sounds confusing. Like, I'm not sure who's right or what the truth is.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely confusing. I think these things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Like, it's possible that a certain company, has sort of run out of a quota and another company has a bunch left over. We don't have the numbers on sort of the amount of quota allocated to each company to know whether that's happening.
When you started reporting this story, did you feel like, oh, I'm going to figure this out? Like, there's going to be some story of like a guy at the manufacturer who, there's going to be a reason why this is happening. I'm going to figure it out.
Well, I would always like to. When I started reporting this story, I was doing some research about this and finding out that this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. Back in 2011 and 2012, there were Adderall shortages. The FDA had reported that. And the FDA at the time, said that these DEA quotas were contributing to the situation. The DEA said that, the drug companies had enough and, people should look at what they were choosing to manufacture with it. So, this wasn't a completely new situation. I'm always hopeful that I'm going to be able to get to the bottom of something. But, it seemed like this was pointing toward sort of a deeper issue than just, there was sort of a one issue at one particular plant. And, now we've solved that and then, things are back to normal.
What's the deeper issue? Is it just the tangled relationship between the government and these manufacturers of a substance that they've put on Schedule 2, which means it's a controlled substance?
Yeah, so that sort of situation and relationship, I think, makes it challenging to get some of this information that would help, figure out what's really going on here. It's not like the government's just saying, well, you can only make 10 units and you can only make 20 pills and you can only make 30 capsules because, we think that's sort of the optimal way that this should work, right? There are civil and criminal penalties for doing this wrong. And, if these drugs are diverted or abused and, someone's found to be at fault for that, you can get barred from being able to make these, period. And, we're seeing a lot of that with prescription opioids, right? It's more than just, well, like, do we have the right amount? There's a lot on the line here.
After the break, how supply issues with Adderall are now spreading.
This episode is brought to you by Divvy from Bill. If you're growing a business, you need Divvy. It's the free spend and expense software powered by the Divvy Visa Business Card. With credit lines from $50K to $5 million, Divvy is here to help you thrive. For a limited time, get $500 when you get started with Divvy. Request a demo at getdivvy.com/500. Terms and conditions apply. See offer page for details. Advertised credit lines are not guaranteed and are determined upon application approval. Card issued by Cross River Bank, member FDIC.
In recent months, the ADHD medication shortage has spread beyond Adderall. The University of Utah's Drug Information Service recently reported shortages of Ritalin and Concerta, which use a completely different base ingredient. And once again, the why is mostly a guessing game.
The FDA has not declared an official shortage of those drugs, and so there's sort of less hard information about why exactly it's been challenging to fill those prescriptions. But, that started happening as a lot of people had trouble getting prescriptions for Adderall. And as some of the advice, that patients and doctors were getting was, well, maybe you should try a different medication if we can't get Adderall. So it looks like those Adderall shortages have sort of spread to the other medications that people, might be advised to take instead. But it's also important to remember that these medicines are not exact substitutes for each other, right? So Adderall is an amphetamine-based medication. Ritalin and Concerta are methylphenidate-based medications, which are two different chemicals. So for some people, one of those types of drugs might work really well and the other one might not work well at all.
So there's a shortage because all these people are switching, but even though they're switching, the drug might not even work.
Well, I would think that, some people might not switch because maybe they tried Ritalin years ago and it didn't really work very well and now they're taking Adderall. Or they would be taking Adderall and then try to switch to Ritalin and it might work or it might not work.
So not a great outcome regardless.
Right. Or, one of the other frustrating things that's come up, and lots of people are taking the generic versions. The generic version might be harder to find, but, now on the FDA website, it looks like, Teva's brand Adderall is available. So if you can get the brand, but the insurance doesn't cover the brand or doesn't pay for it as much, you all of a sudden, owe more money on this prescription that you've, been taking regularly for a while and, normally you're able to get the generic.
What would you say to someone who looks at this shortage and just thinks, is this really that big of a deal? Like, no one's going to die without their access to Adderall.
Well, one is that it's important to remember that, while this is a popular drug for ADHD, it's also a medication for narcolepsy. And, there are a lot of people who are taking the drug for narcolepsy and, need that to be able to stay awake and, go about their lives in a normal way. So that's sort of one group of people that, I think may often be overlooked in this. But, for people who have ADHD too, this is a medicine that has, for many people, enabled them to, do things they otherwise couldn't have, to maintain a level of, mental organization and clarity that otherwise, wouldn't have been possible without the medication. Maybe worried about losing their jobs if you can't, show up to the meeting or remember to do and complete the tasks that you need to do.
I mean, I keep hearing this language when the Adderall shortage is discussed. Like doctors saying, we don't want a repeat of what happened with opioids. And I'm curious what you think of that language and why it's being used.
I know that there are doctors who are concerned with sort of when people lump opioids and Adderall together. Both are Schedule II controlled substances. With opioids, there was sort of a lot of inappropriate prescribing, a lot of inappropriate marketing, a lot of people taking the drugs at doses that shouldn't have been prescribed, people ending up addicted to the drugs, based on sort of you'd go in for surgery and you would get a prescription for something, right? Like you weren't sort of going out and looking for something to abuse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of curious if you think it's the right analogy. Like, what are people hoping to prevent by not making Adderall more available in some way?
Yeah, I mean, Adderall is a drug that is misused, right? People who take it when they're in college and trying to stay up late writing a paper, right? Now, there's research, there's actually very interesting research on whether it actually improves someone's ability to do that or just makes them think that they have more of an ability to do that. But regardless, there are people who take Adderall when they don't need it. That isn't good.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I read this Los Angeles Times op-ed that basically argued that the current Adderall shortage might create an opioid-like crisis situation by driving people who would have gotten Adderall from their doctors to a kind of gray market. And in fact, I spoke to a woman who said she's having trouble getting Adderall, and she had a friend who, yes, bought some Adderall on the street because there was this shortage. So she was like, yeah, I could see maybe that happening.
Yeah, I would be really interested in, some data or information on how frequent that is. I definitely talked to people at, when this was, sort of starting to happen back over the summer and into the fall, who that thought had crossed their minds, right? Or they were thinking, am I going to have to go to the black market? And that was really scary for a lot of people because you don't know what you're buying. And there, have been a lot of reports of, people buying pills that, say they're Adderall, but are laced with fentanyl or something like that. I remember talking to someone else who, had posted something on social media about this Adderall shortage and then got a message from someone offering to sell them something.
Is there any timetable for when the shortage might end?
So on the FDA's website, some of the companies say when they think their back orders or supply constraints will end. But globally, the FDA has not given a prediction. And so, yeah, the short answer is we don't know.
When you ask experts, like what needs to change to prevent a shortage like this happening again? Because it has happened. It happened in 2010, 2011. It happened this past year. Like, what do they say?
So I don't think I've talked to people specifically about what changes have to happen to prevent an Adderall shortage. I have talked to people about, what changes might have to happen to prevent drug shortages in general. And one of the big things that come up is that they all just want more transparency so that they can actually answer that question, right? Because, people, we don't know, for example, where physically a lot of these drugs are produced. The FDA releases some information about why companies, might have a product in short supply, but not a lot of information. So a number of the experts I've talked to have said that, having more information about the cause of a shortage will help policymakers figure out what the best solutions are.
And this is not just for Adderall. This is for any drug.
Oh, yeah. And the government agencies, have more of that information, but it's challenging to have sort of an informed public discussion about it when the researchers, the academics, the public doesn't. It's a much more complicated situation, I think, than it looked like, back over the summer. And I think that we're still trying to figure out exactly sort of how to get the information that will allow people much more qualified than me to figure out some solutions.
Ike, thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thank you.
Ike Swetlitz is a health reporter for Bloomberg News. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Paige Osborne, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are getting a ton of support from Jared Downing and Laura Spencer. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go check me down on Twitter. Say hello. I'm at Mary's desk. I'll catch you back here tomorrow. Macy's is committed to creating brighter futures for all and empowering a new generation of leaders. That's why they're continuing support of Girls Inc. all throughout March. Your online or in-store donation will help fund education and career readiness programming, inspiring all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. Give back and learn more at Macys.com/purpose. That is Macys.com/purpose.